Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to make use of a UI split view controller for the iPad API. And so as always, we're going to start with creating a new Xcode project. Now, for the most part, it'll be very similar to iPhone programming, but because this is specialized for the iPad, there's going to be some specific changes just for the iPad's user interface, and that's really what Apple's pushing. They want developers to make their iPhone applications work as well, if not better, on the iPad because of the new screen space. So we go here on the iPhone OS, we choose application, we're going to choose window based. Now, we could choose split view based application, which would set the split view up, but I'm going to start with window based, in other words, really nothing, and we're going to build towards this and make that basically our final product. And you can see the whole process and how a split view controller works underneath. Now here there's a drop down, it says product on the left, and there's a drop down. We have iPhone, iPad, and Universal. Universal, as you might imagine, is building an application that's customized for both the iPhone and the iPad, but it's in one package. We're not going to go over how to do that in this video. Really, we're just going to focus on the iPad. So we're going to choose iPad here, and let's create that new project. So I'm just going to call it split. Alright, so let's start by opening main-window.zib and take a look at what we've got here. So now this iPad window is quite large, so we're gonna have a scroll bar here, but that's alright. So when we create any blank application for the iPhone, we have the files owner, first responder, the window, and an instance of the delegate class. And so now the main difference here is, since this is for the iPad, the window here is much larger and it's styled for the iPad. Other than that, everything's pretty much the same. So let's close this and let's actually get our AppDelegate class ready to display a split view controller inside the window. So in the .h file here, inside the curly braces, we're going to add an IB outlet for a split view controller. Now let's save this, and let's go back to main-window.zib and add that split view controller. So we can close the window here. We don't need this on the screen. Now if we, at the top of our library here, if you don't have that open, of course you can go to Tools, Library. At the top we have split view controller. So we're just going to drag that onto the Instances window. And now we have a split view controller that we're going to use for displaying that split view on the iPad screen. But now we want to add this as a subview to the window because, as you know, the window is always the first thing that appears on screen, the default interface object that comes up on the user's screen when main-window.zib is loaded. So let's drag from here to split AppDelegate instance to the split view controller and connect the split view controller outlet. And so now that outlet is connected. We can close this, save this, and close. Now let's go to split AppDelegate.m and add that split view controller's view as a subview to the window. Alright, so now our split view controller is on screen, and now we can work with it. So let's open main-window.zib again, and let's open a split view controller. Now, the way split view controller works is in landscape, it's got this left view here that is most likely to be a table view controller. It doesn't have to be, but in every iPad application I've seen so far, that's the way it's been set up. So basically you have a table view controller on the left here, and on the right you have the actual application, the contents. You know, the part that the user is really going to be interacting with. So it's almost like you're splitting your application into different sections, much like a tab bar controller for the iPhone. And so, for instance, you'll have a few rows here, and depending on what row the user is currently selected, on the left side, different interface objects will appear on the right side. A different view will pop up for the selection on the left. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a table view on the left, and we're going to have three rows: view 1, view 2, and nothing. And so depending on which row the user selects on the left side, something different will appear on the right side here. But now there's a twist with split view controllers, and that is they need to be configured to work in both landscape and portrait view. And in fact, Apple's iPad programming guide stresses the fact that iPad applications must be able to work in both landscape and portrait. For the iPhone, that's an option. If you want your application only to work in landscape or only in portrait, you're allowed to do that. And so when the user turns their iPhone, the accelerometer will send a message to your application, but your application basically ignores it and locks the screen in portrait or landscape. With the iPad, Apple wants or basically requires that any application is able to work in both landscape and portrait. And I guess the reason for that is they want to make sure that the user, I guess, is getting the most for their money, or that the experience is there for all applications, that it really feels like a tablet. And landscape and portrait capability on all applications definitely helps that. So let's take a look at what happens when we twist this or turn this into portrait. Right now it's in landscape. If we send it to portrait, you can see that the whole left side disappears. And to compensate for that, we have something called a popover controller. And so we'll have a tab bar on the top here. And when the user's in portrait, there'll be a little button here. And choosing that will bring that table view in a popover just to display on the screen on the left side, and the user can choose which view to display that way. And so we're going to have to set that up so that the user can be in portrait and landscape and not lose that whole left side. It's still there, but it's condensed into a little tiny button, which when pressed expands a popover. Okay. So we're going to need two view controllers, a left side controller and a right side view controller. And so the left side will be that table view, and the right side will be the actual application, or the view that should appear based on what's chosen in the left side. So let's close this. Let's begin by creating that left side view controller. So let's go back to Xcode, go to classes, file, new file. Right, and so we're going to choose UI view controller subclass, and we're going to want to check targeted for iPad. We're also going to want to check UI table view controller subclass, because this is going to be for the left side and we want that to be a table view, so why not just make it a table view controller and save ourselves some time. Let Xcode set up the table view. And we also want zib for interface. So let's click next, and let's just call this left side view controller to avoid any confusion here. Okay, so now we have the zip file here in the classes folder. I'm going to move that down to the resources folder. Okay, so now you can see this is a subclass of UI table view controller, and we have our table view methods. So let's give the number of sections, let's just say one. We want one section, so this is really going to be a simple application. For rows, we're gonna put 3. And for now, let's just do something really simple. Let's do cell.textLabel.text equals a formatted string, and we're going to say row, and then we're just going to plug in the index path for the row. So we should have 3 rows here, and they should read row 0, row 1, and row 2. Alright, so now let's save that. And now let's go into the main window.zip file again, open up that split view controller, and now we can click inside here and change the nib name to left side view controller. And so it'll load that, and we want the class to be left side view controller. Alright, so now this left side automatically, because we've made the class left side view controller and we made the zip file left side view controller.zib, the split view controller will create an instance of left side view controller using left side view controller.zib as itself. It'll load it with that for the instance of the left side view controller, and it'll display it here. Right, now let's close this and run it. Let's save this and run the application, and you'll notice that it's blank here. If we rotate it left, it's still blank. Now, the reason for that is the split view controller actually doesn't work unless you give it a left side and a right side. So basically, it's kind of like it disables itself until it's got everything it needs to fully display its contents. So let's get started on that right side view controller then. Let's go File, New File. Now we want it to be targeted for the iPad. We don't want it to be a subclass of a UI table view controller. We want it to be just a view controller. So we're going to uncheck that, but we do want the zip file for an interface. So now let's create that. So we'll call this one right side view controller. Save that. And again, let's move this zip file into the resources folder. Alright, so now let's go back to main window.zib, open that split view controller, and on the right, we're going to do the same thing as we did with the left, except class is going to be a right side view controller, and the zip file is going to be the right side view controller.zib. Right, so we can close this. Let's save the main window.zib, and now let's run it and see what happens. Okay, so now everything displays, but we have nothing in that right side view controller. It's blank, but we do have this here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we rotate this right and we're in portrait, we need a popover to come up here, but we haven't set that up yet. So right now, if the user were to use this application, they'd be extremely confused, because if they were in portrait, they wouldn't be able to navigate around the different views. They would only be able to do it in landscape. So let's get started on giving the right side some content. So let's quit this. Let's open right side view controller. And now we need the library up again, so we're going to go to Tools, Library. And let's first give it a toolbar at the top so we can add that popover button. Right. Okay. And so now we're going to delete this here. We don't need that. But let's save this, and let's just give it some random label here, and we'll just say right side. Save this. But now let's close this real quick, and let's go back to the right side view controller.zip file, and let's create an outlet for that toolbar. So IB outlet UI toolbar. Let's save, and then let's open this again. Let's connect that. So I'm going to right click and drag up to the toolbar and connect the toolbar outlet. Save. Close this again, and let's get that popover ready. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go back to main window.zib, and we need to set the split view controller's delegate to be the right side view controller. So split view controllers have a delegate, and it's not available in the documentation yet, since it's still in beta as of March 28th. But basically, I can explain for you that the split view controller has 3 delegate methods, but we're only going to be looking at 2. And the point of these delegate methods is for when the user switches into landscape or to portrait. And when they switch to portrait, one method gets called. When they switch to landscape, another gets called. And basically the point is to allow you to display that popover controller. So the split view controller actually does most of the work for you. It creates the popover view controller, and it condenses the entire left side of the split view controller into that popover, and then it gives you a reference to that popover controller so you can display it. Let's double click on the split view controller, right, and we're going to want to drag from here to the right side. So let's drag, and then we have the delegate outlet so we can connect that. And so now the split view controller, when it goes from portrait to landscape or vice versa, will send a message to that right side view controller with some information. So it'll give it a reference to itself, it'll give it the view controller that it's trying to hide or show, and then it'll give it a button, a bar button item to list in the right side view controller's toolbar, and when that's pressed, that button is already configured by the split view controller to display the left side's contents in a pop-up. So let's go to right side view controller.m and let's get that displayed. So the first one I want to look at is split view controller, UI split view controller. I'm going to shorten that with SVC. Will hide view controller with bar button item for popover controller. I'm going to just shorten that with PC. Alright, so as I mentioned, the split view controller will send this to its delegate, which we've configured to be the right side view controller, and it gives it all this, it basically sets it up for you, and all you have to do is just add it to your toolbar. So it'll send in a reference to itself, a reference to the view controller it's hiding, or the left side view controller, a pre-configured UI bar button item which when pressed will display the left side contents in a popover, and then a reference to the actual popover controller, which is where the left side's contents will be displayed in that popover. So now first let's give it a title, bar button item title, and let's just say left side. Now we're gonna want to make a mutable array here of the items that are already in the toolbar. So toolbar items, mutable copy. Alright, so the reason we do this is so that if you already have some items in your toolbar, that's not gonna be erased. We're actually just going to shift those all over to the right and then insert the left side button here, the popover controller button, all the way at the left. So that'll be the first button, and everything else will be shifted to the right. If you don't have anything in your toolbar and you never plan to, then you can just add it right away. But we're going to set this up so that in the future, if we decide to add other things to our right side view controller's toolbar, we don't have to worry about those being replaced or erased by the button that we're adding in right now for the popover. So items insert object, the bar button item here, at index 0, right? And again, so now this bar button item, we have this items array, which is an array of the items in the toolbar, the bar button items or whatever. And so now we're inserting this bar button item, the popover controller's button, at index 0, and so now everything else will be shifted over automatically to the right. We're going to give this new items array back to the toolbar. Set items animated yes, so that it gets a nice little animation when its buttons are replaced or refreshed. And then we're going to release that items array. And then we can close this. Then we have another method here, similar to setup similar to the first one, except this one's called when it goes back into landscape. So when the left side view controller actually comes back on the screen. So we'll show view controller. And this is where it's mostly different in validating bar button item. And so now this is called again when you go into landscape, and now we no longer need that pop-up view controller because we're now that left side is actually going to be back on the screen because now we're switching back into landscape, and so now we can take that popover controller out of the toolbar, or the button that displays it out of the toolbar. And so we're going to do that here. So alright, so now we have those completed. So let's run this and see what we've got so far. And so now automatically we have that left side, and so there you have it. You can see that the split view controller will call this right when the application launches, depending on which way the iPad is being held or configured. And so now if we rotate this to the left, you can see that that button will be erased, or the toolbar is also gone. So the toolbar is gone because the height of the view has been shortened, so it's basically being cut off. But if it were there or visible, you would see that the left side button is no longer in the toolbar. And so we've basically got the split view controller set up, but now let's actually make it worth something. All right, so let's quit this. Now let's make it so that depending on what the user selects on the left side, something different shows up on the right side. So first of all, let's go into left side view controller and let's actually give it a title. So in view did load, we're going to uncomment view did load. I'm going to make the title content selection. And so now this property above the title right here that's already there for us, self clear selection on view will appear, is pretty important. Basically, if you set this to yes, each time after this view has been hidden, once it appears again, whatever is selected in the table view, whatever row was last selected, it will be cleared, and it'll be like no row selected. We don't want that because, again, if you remember, the goal of a split view controller is to make it so that the left side is basically like a content selection or a view selection for the right side. And so if the user chooses view 8 and then rotates it to portrait, when they come back into landscape, we still want view 8 row to be selected because they're still on view 8 on the right side. So we're going to want that to be no. And so it'll save or won't clear the row last selected in its table view controller. So now let's make some changes here. Instead of just making our cells row 0, 1, and 2, let's make them view 1, view 2, and display nothing. So we're going to switch indexPath.row case 0 cell.text label text is view 1. Case 1 view 2, and case 2 we're going to display nothing. So let's say that and see how that looks. Okay, so definitely a little bit more user-friendly and similar to what we might expect in a real application. So now let's make it so that when the user selects view 1, view 2, or nothing, something different appears on the right side. So let's go into right side view controller .h, and we're going to need two different views here to add as subviews to the main view. So IB outlet UI view view 1, and then we're going to need another one for view 2. Alright, so now let's save this, and now let's go into right side view controller.zib. Let's create two views. So in the library here, we're going to find a view, UI view, and we're going to make first one. So now let's open this. And let's just add a bunch of things, just so it's clear that we're on view 1 or view 2. So first let's add a label, view 1. Let's make it large. Alright, so now let's add, let's say, a button. And let's add a text field. So again, we're not really creating a real application here. We're just going to add a bunch of things so it's easy to see if we're on view 1 or if we're on view 2. And page control. All right. So now let's close this, save, and now let's make a copy of view 1 here. Paste it, but now let's change everything up. So this needs to say view 2. We'll delete everything we've got. Let's add a activity indicator, a progress view. Let's add a segment control. And another label that says this is not view 1. Okay, now let's close this. Now let's save, and now let's connect those outlets, view 1 and view 2, so we can add those as subviews to the main view. So basically, when the user selects view 1 from the left side, we're going to take this view and add it as a subview to the real main view of the right side view controller, this part here. And when the user selects view 2, we're going to add view 2 as a subview to the main view. And then when they select display nothing, we'll remove both view 1 and view 2 from the main view, or whichever is on the screen. So now let's add some methods here in our .h display view 1, display view 2, and display nothing. Alright, and so now first we need to go to left side view control.h, and we're going to need a reference from left side to the right side view so that when a user selects something on the left side, we can send a message to the right side and tell the right side to display something. So IB outlet right side view controller. Let's save this. Now let's go into main window.zib and make that connection. So here's the left side, here's the right side. So we can just drag from the left side to the right side and connect the right side view controller outlet. We can close this and let's save and then close again. And now let's go into left side view controller.m, and we have here UI table view did select row and index path. So let's delete all this in here. And let's make it so that when the user selects row 0 or view 1, we send a message to the right side view controller displaying view 1. When they select view 2, we'll display view 2. When they just select display nothing, we'll remove both views from the screen. So if index path.row equals 0, right side view controller display view 1. Else if index path.row equals 1, tell it to display view 2, otherwise display nothing. Let's save that. Now we need to go into the top, and so we don't get any compiler errors, we're going to need to import right side view controller. Let's save that. And so now we're going to need to actually implement those methods in the right side view controller. So first we have here display view 1. And so first we're going to send a message to view 2, tell it to remove itself from the super view. In case that the user does have view 2 on the screen, we're going to want to remove it. And so if view 2 isn't on the screen, then this will basically do nothing. But if it is, view 2 will take itself out of its super view and will take itself off of the screen. And so there's a little trick here that we're going to have to do. See, the view 1 is going to actually overlap or display itself on top of the toolbar on the very top of the screen. We don't want that. We want it to be down a few pixels. So we need to actually adjust its frame. So let's first get the frame that it does have. And now we're going to want to shift it down, let's say 100 pixels. So the origin of this new frame that we're creating is to use CG point make, which returns a CG point struct. So the X value we want to be 0, so it's all the way on the left. But we want the Y value to be 100, so it's pushed down 100 pixels, so it doesn't overlap anything. Now let's give that new frame back to view 1. And now we can add it as a subview to the main view here. We can close that. Now let's do the same thing for display view 2. We want to remove view 1 and then add view 2. Let's save that. And now we need display nothing. We can simply just remove view 1 and view 2 from super view. Save that. Now let's build it and see what happens. So let's rotate left, select view 1. Okay, let's try view 2, and let's try nothing. So we're back to the original label. And so let's make a few changes here. So now if we rotate to the right, choose left side, that happens. But now we want to make it so that when the user, if they're in the portrait view and they choose something from the popover, that after they select something, the popover disappears. All right, so let's take care of that. Let's quit this. So we're going to need a reference to the popover controller. So UI popover controller, we'll say popover. So now let's go into the delegate method here. When the split view controller gives us a reference to that popover controller, let's save that. Popover equals PC. If you remember, we go all the way to the right here. It passes it in the variable PC. All right. So now we have a reference to it, and so now we have this great method Apple's made for us that we can send to popover controllers, which is dismiss popover animated. And so you send that to a popover, and it will, as the method title implies, will dismiss itself or fade off the screen. So we need an if statement here to make sure that the popover isn't nil, because depending on when this is called, it might be. And so popover dismiss animated, or dismiss popover animated, yeah. Now we can copy and paste this in the other two. Save, and now let's take a look what happens. Now if we choose one, you can see that the popover actually fades off the screen very nicely. And so now we have one more change we want to make here before we're finished, and that is, you can see that when we have this popover here, it's quite large and it takes up a lot of screen space, but we can actually change how large this popover is. So we can go into left side viewcontroller.m, and we have a property called content size for view in popover, and simply we give it a CG size struct. And so let's try 200 by 200. So now if this view, should this view be displayed in a popover controller, this is the size that it'll use. That's the size that the popover will use. So that's much better, it's much smaller. And so now our application is finished, and we have completed a split view controller. I'm Anthony from iCodeTeacher.com. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thank you very much for watching.